Hello, everybody. All right, welcome everybody here in the room and everybody out there on Crowdcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to be hosting this reading with Barbara Wuest and James Lewelling, which has actually been a long time coming. So I'm excited that it's happening this evening. My name is Mike Wendt. I'm the programming director here at Woodland Pattern. And I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and say that we at Woodland Pattern acknowledge that here in Milwaukee we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigami, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We further acknowledge the grave evil colonialism introduced to these lands through genocide as well as slavery, but also via racist and xenophobic beliefs, laws, and practices that continue to inflict harm upon Black, Brown, and Indigenous lives. We honor those who have lived and do live now at these intersections of identity and experience and are committed to the active dismantling of white supremacy. So once again, thank you all for joining us. And I just have to say, a huge thank you to Barbara and to James just for being here, but also because discussions about this reading began in 2019, about a reading in 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020 and the years that followed, so I'm really grateful to be here now, so thank you. Of course, I'd be remiss not to mention that we have books for sale in the front, so if you want to check those out, visit the bookstore after the reading, please do so if you have not already, or visit it again, Just want to mention a few upcoming events, and then we can, roll right into it. But letting you know that first up, this Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m., we're hosting a workshop. If anybody has a chapbook-length manuscript's worth of poems that you just need a little help figuring out how to arrange and put together, Edie Roberts will be here for Getting It Together, is the name of the workshop, from 1 to 4 p.m. on Sunday. So space is limited, but the spots are available. On Tuesday, August 8th, please join us for Poetry in the Park, which is not here, as the name would suggest. It's in Juneau Park, and that is a monthly series that takes place June, July, August, September. This month's reading will feature Suzanne Rosenblatt, Edie Roberts, Brian Cherry, and Ish Klein joining us from Michigan, so that should be pretty terrific, and it's always a nice time just to hear some poetry outside in the summer and soak that in while we can. And then, last but certainly not least, I do want to mention and really hope that you will join us for our upcoming brunch raiser, taking place Sunday, August 13th at Bar Centro. Funds raised at this event will support Milwaukee's next generation of poets through the Milwaukee Youth Poet Laureate Program and the Milwaukee Emerging Poet Fellowship. So it's a fundraiser in particular for those two programs. The event will feature a poetry catwalk, silent auction, live music, great food and drinks, and no doubt wonderful company. So let us know if you're interested. Tickets are available. Come see us out there or find us online, woodlandpattern.org, or both. And finally, I do want to make sure you're probably already aware because of the flyers on your chairs, but there is an after party, wonderfully, graciously hosted by Barbara and Glenn. So please get there, have fun. But first, let's enjoy this reading. It's my great pleasure to begin by introducing James Lewelling, who has been writing fiction since 1988. He has written 5 novels and had 3 published. Those are Little Rooms from Deep Set Press, Tortoise from Calamari Press, and This Guy from Spuyten Duyvil. Over the years, his short fiction has appeared in a variety of literary venues, ranging from the Cream City Review, to The Stranger, to the Evergreen Review, to Fence. For the last 20 years, he and his wife, the poet Lisa Isaacson, have lived and worked in Abu Dhabi, but have recently returned to Milwaukee, where the James grew up, so welcome back to Milwaukee. James Lewelling has been quoted as saying, quote, I write out of or from the human condition rather than about the human condition. And one can feel this distinction in his writing, where we're given over to recognizable sensations and emotions, even as the situations and characters we encounter are decidedly surreal, tinged with the absurd while echoing the familiar. In Little Rooms, for instance, we join Mary Smith and Parson Smith and Jack as they share hooch, a lot of hooch, and existential dread as they're, quote, swallowed into normalcy. Or the narrator of the novel Tortoise, spoiler alert, watching his father Ray literally losing his head as it slowly detaches from his body while he describes the way, quote, all animals burrow through time, even birds, even people, ... burrowing in ignorance. In Lewelling's writing, we find uncanny circumstances shot through with a recognizable sense of anxiety, obsession, and recollection, all expressed through language that is at times recursive, maybe even sometimes claustrophobic or cozy, if you want to. Yet there's a distinctive sense of humor, too, as well as moments of almost stoic recognition, moments that one could go so far as to call soothing in their clarity. It's writing that, for all its formal adventurousness, is also marked by a sense of restraint and close attention to the nuances of language. As Mark Everett notes in a review in the Brooklyn Rail, quote, Lewelling is a patient, crafty writer, building up his stories slowly as if by accidental accretion, the minutiae of human experience laid bare with a pleasing, revelatory exactitude. Please welcome James Lewelling.
Thanks for that introduction. I think that's more than anybody's said about my work in the last 20 years. So it's really thrilling to me. Thank you, Michael. It was nice. And I want to thank Woodland Pattern for having this reading. This is really nice, too. It's great to have this opportunity to read to you. And I want to thank Barbara so much for inviting me here to do this with her. And we've been planning it, like you were saying, for more than 5 years. And so here we are. Okay, so I have a structure to this reading. I didn't just come up with it randomly, okay? So it's basically the reading's structured after a book by Italo Calvino, which you might have heard of, called If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Calvino's is a crazy Italian postmodern writer, and what he did is he wrote this book that was composed exclusively of first chapters. So it's 9 chapters, and each is to a different book that's never written. So they're introductions to fictional fictions that don't exist, okay? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not doing 9, okay, but just 4. I'm just going to read the first couple pages of my novels, each of the novels, to introduce you to that universe, okay? And there's that kind of nice, neat structure, but there's a thematic reason for doing this as well, which is that I found, as you noted a little bit, in my work there's a tension. One of the things that drives my work is this tension between the mundane and the quotidian, the normal, everyday space of life that gets repeated over and over, and then what we could call the plot space of life is where things happen to you, and then other things happen because of those things happening, and you find yourself in a story, and locked into something. Typically, when you're young, you're all into story space. You want something to happen. When is something going to happen? I want something to happen, But then as we get older, we realize that the things that happen to us generally are not good, often. So now we're like, nothing happened. Let nothing happen, right? No news is good news. Okay, so hopefully you'll see some of that in the work. Okay, so I'm going to start out with one book that you didn't get to mention because it just came out not too long ago. It's called Innocence. And I'm just going to read the first couple of pages. It begins with an epigraph, which I like to put in, which is a little quotation at the beginning of the book, usually something very far from where the book is, but we'll see. This is from Soren Kierkegaard. He says, despair, at its minimum, is a state that, yes, one could humanly be tempted almost to say that in a kind of innocence, it does not even know that it is despair. Okay, here we go. something happened, and suddenly I needed reading glasses. This was like some time ago. Okay. It is an extraordinary coincidence that on the morning of the day of my incapacitating accident, my mother called to tell me that Moira had committed suicide. I had just returned from dropping my daughters off at school and was getting ready to mop up the apartment when the phone rang. I picked it up immediately. My mother was on the other end. She had bad news, she said, and then she told me Moira had committed suicide. Moira's father, my uncle, had found her, my mother said. Moira had been visiting them, my aunt and uncle, and then gone home. She hadn't called them when she got home as she usually did, and then she hadn't answered the phone when my uncle called her. My uncle figured something must be wrong, so he drove out to her place, and that's when he found her. She was dead. She had taken pills. She had left a note. She didn't want anyone to blame themselves for her death, my mother said. The note was a kind of apology. It was an apology for committing suicide. It also included instructions for her funeral, my mother said. I didn't know what to say to my mother. I hadn't been close to Moira since childhood. In fact, I hadn't even spoken to Moira in more than 10 years. Still, the news of her death by suicide, came as quite a shock. In fact, for several long moments, I could only sit there at my desk with the phone pressed to my ear, speechless. But then I told my mother how sorry I was that such a thing had happened. She said she was sorry too, and then she hung up. I was alone in the apartment. I had the mop out and the bucket full of sudsy water and picked everything up off the floors. I was all ready to go, as they say. But I could hardly begin mopping the floor as I had intended because before my mother called. To do so would have been like continuing my day as if nothing had happened. It wouldn't be decent, I thought, sitting at my desk with the phone in my hand. I should do something, I thought. I would write to my aunt and my uncle, I knew, but I would write them later. Whatever I wrote would have to be carefully considered, I was thinking. I hadn't seen Moira in more than 10 years and hadn't been close to her since we were kids, a long, long time ago. I felt bad and wanted to share that, but at the same time, I didn't want to write something either phony or generic. Also, I was in shock. I think it was the idea of her father finding her there that shocked me even more than the suicide itself. Hearing the news that my uncle had found his daughter dead in her apartment, dead by her own hand, I couldn't help but imagine for a fraction of a second me finding one of my own daughters in some hazy, hypothetical future, dead in her apartment, dead by her own hand. Such a scene was inconceivable to me, as undoubtedly, even given the situation Moira had been in for some time, it had been inconceivable to my uncle before he had been forced to take part in it. In fact, sitting there at my desk with the phone still in my hand and the mop in the bucket leaning against the wall behind me, I felt momentarily that I had passed through an invisible door into a strange and unreal world. I felt that way even though the idea of suicide was familiar to me and the fact of suicide no surprise whatsoever. I felt that way even though I realized, almost immediately upon hearing of her death, that Moira, given the situation she'd been in for a very long time, was an ideal candidate for suicide, as they say. And in fact, had I given the matter even 10 minutes of serious consideration before I had heard the news, I might even have expected Moira to commit suicide. It's like a car accident, I thought, still sitting at my desk with the phone in my hand. You might feel upon hearing of the death of someone you know in a car accident, I was thinking, that you have passed through an invisible door into a strange and unreal world. You might feel shocked, even though you regarded the occurrence of car accidents as commonplace, even predictable events in the modern world. Everyone feels shocked when someone they know is killed in a car accident. What's more, they feel shocked even when that person who was killed in the car accident might have been expected to be killed in a car accident. For example, in the case of reckless drivers or the elderly who are nearing the very end of their driving lives. Even in those cases, cases in which you may even have warned the future car accident fatality that if she or she continued to drive like that is recklessly, or indeed continued to drive at all, in the case of the elderly, he or she could more or less expect to be killed in a car accident. You're bound to feel shocked when you learn that that person has indeed been killed in a car accident, and even feel momentarily that you have passed through an invisible door into a strange and unreal world. You would feel that way even though you knew it made no sense for you to be shocked or even surprised. After all, one is rarely, if ever, shocked when someone one doesn't know is killed in a car accident, I was thinking, still sitting at my desk with the phone in my hand. Finding out that someone one doesn't know has been killed in a car accident is the most normal thing in the world. In fact, one can even read about the rate of car accidents in one's vicinity or globally, and thereby be informed of the killings of hundreds or even thousands or even millions of past and future strangers without experiencing even the mildest of shocks or any kind of sensation that one has passed into a strange and unreal world. Quite the contrary. On reading about the rate of car accidents and thereby learning of the traffic deaths of hundreds or even thousands or even millions of perfect strangers, one is filled rather with an almost numbing sensation of normality. I put down the phone. That's the first one. Okay, this is the second one, Tortoise, and this is available for sale. No t-shirts yet, but we're working on it. Okay. This also begins with an epigraph. Okay, it's from a folk song, which I'm sure you guys all know, the Big Rock Candy Mountain, and the epigraph is, "One evening as the sun went down and the jungle fire was burning, down the track came a hobo hiking, and he said, 'Boys, I'm not turning.'" And I just picked that because I just like this idea of not turning, you know? I mean, what happens if you just kept going? Okay. So, Ray was a patient man. He kept the most important business to himself until he was very close to the end. When he called me up, I decided to leave right away because I didn't think he had much longer. It was a long trip back and not without anxiety. I worried that maybe he had waited too long. I didn't want to get there and find him gone. I knew he wouldn't have written anything down, or if he had, he would have compulsively edited it into a cryptic fragment that would be worse than nothing. The drive to the airport was a straight shot. I kissed Nancy and the girls goodbye and took the elevator down to the street where a cab was waiting. There was no traffic at all, hardly unusual for that time of night. I sat beside the driver, gazing out the window at the dark blankness on my side of the road. He wants to tell me something, I kept thinking, but couldn't get beyond that. Before I knew it, I'd pulled my suitcase from the trunk, checked myself in, and was headed to the gate. The flight was packed. It looked like every last ticket had been sold. I had to squeeze around this big, beefy guy to get to my place. We were on the ground for at least a half an hour, but he didn't move a muscle. He must have been exhausted or drunk. The stewardess had to belt him in for takeoff. As for me, I couldn't sleep on a plane to save my life. I held the armrests until we stopped going up. Sometime after we breached the clouds, I started to relax. The beefy guy was still sleeping like a baby. I turned to the window. Below me, the world looked like surf. Looking down on the clouds, I tried to recall what I had already heard from Ray. For a long time, the only thing I could think of was the rabbit hunt. It was a kind of festival that involved all the neighbors. They encircled a field and flushed the rabbits to the center where they clubbed them to death. Ray hadn't wanted to tell me about killing rabbits, I thought, but that was what he had. He had the death of his father, too, it goes without saying. A combine killed his father. With half his body crushed under the machine, Ray's father bled to death telling other people what to do about it. He was very cool-headed, Ray said. This was also the thing about his mother, I recalled. Ray hadn't told me about it himself. Lillian told me for him. In any case, according to Lillian, Ray's mother went a bit insane shortly after Ray's birth. It had been a prolonged and agonizing delivery, and the poor woman blanked the whole thing from her mind, including Ray. When Ray was a baby, and indeed throughout his whole life, his mother never really believed that he was hers. The doctors thought a second child would bring her back to her senses. The treatment was a success, and that she acknowledged the second child, a boy, all right, but she never remembered Ray. Later, a soldier killed the second child, Ray's younger brother. I would say that he was killed in a war, Lillian said, but as it happens, a sniper got him when he put his head up just moments after an armistice had been declared. I don't think Ray has ever gotten over that, Lillian said. I'm not so sure, I thought, looking down at the clouds. In fact, I couldn't think of anything that Ray hadn't gotten over, but maybe that was just because he hadn't gotten over it yet. Ray wasn't the type to talk about a problem until it had already been solved or very nearly solved. That is, he wasn't the type to complain. Ray always said, if you know you have something to get over and you know what that thing is, getting over it should be a piece of cake. He was absolutely right, I thought. What's more, I thought, even in cases where you have something to get over but you don't know what it is, there's still no point in complaining. It's better to just get on with it, as they say. There's no point in complaining about some vague, invisible thing, I thought, because for all you know, all your complaints might be getting you under it, or pushing you around it, or bashing you right up against it, I thought, looking down at the clouds. This matter with Ray must be extremely important, I thought, looking down at the clouds. He had waited his whole life to let me in on it. He wouldn't have called me if he had thought he could put it off any longer. The importance of what Ray had to tell me was directly proportional to his reluctance to do so, I thought. He wouldn't be telling me at all if he figured he could avoid it. Ray wouldn't have called if he thought someone else would tell me. Similarly, he wouldn't have called if he thought he could have told me himself, but told me later. He was like that. If he had something important to say, he always waited until the last minute. He knew how to shut up, that's for sure. Okay, now they start to get a little stranger. This is this guy. Just a note about the title. It is literally about this guy. Okay, so if you were walking around this afternoon and you said, you were telling someone, oh, I saw this guy in the grocery store, that's him. Okay. This person exists only generically, this guy. Okay. Is there an epigraph for this? No. Oh, wait, there is. His Sundays were difficult to get through. And that's a quotation from Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. Okay. It was the very next morning that this guy conceived of his evil scheme to get even with this other guy, Ned. Though complicated, involving multiple phases and elaborate preparations for each phase, there it was the very moment he woke up, all worked out in his head, glinting in the darkness behind his eyelids like a metallic, freshly oiled, spring-driven device. Lying there in his boxers on the mattress in the shitty little room, this guy knew before he had even opened up his eyes that this was going to be a truly unusual Sunday. Just to give you an idea, normally on a Sunday, this guy would remain lying on his mattress or occasionally crawl over to slouch at the table by the window or, more often, roll onto the floor to lie flat on his face for as long as he could stand it, procrastinating the simple acts of bathing, dressing, and eating in a futile bid to avoid acknowledging the day had begun at all. In fact, on the previous Sunday, he had managed it, not setting foot to floor for the entire 24 Sunday hours, to rise on Monday and go to his shitty job at the normal time, just as if Sunday hadn't happened, a perfect wash. But on this Sunday, the Sunday in which he had conceived of his evil scheme to get even with Ned, this guy rolled right off the mattress, literally hopped, over to the bathroom where he brushed his teeth vigorously, shaved, showered, and toweled off without pausing between tasks or even lingering in the shower until the water got cold. What's more, he jumped naked right into the closet without giving the matter a second thought, dragged the full-length mirror out of the back — he had removed it from the sliding door shortly after he first moved in — propped it against the wall, jumped back into the closet, and rummaged around until he obtained a complete set of the cleanest clothes he could find. Black polyester pants, blue blazer, white button-down shirt, a combination of his work and interview clothes. He even considered putting on his interview tie, but somehow chicken grease had gotten all over the end of it. Examining his reflection for the first time in quite a while, he had to admit that though the outfit lacked style, in fact, the combination of black pants and blue blazer looked a bit weird, he was pleased with the overall effect. So neat and clean, even respectable, as if the lack of style were the result of a conscious choice rather than necessity. He turned, giddy and fully cognizant of how portentously this morning had begun. Even if he were to call it quits here, return to his mattress, and lie there for the rest of the day, inert in his clean clothes, he would be able to do so in the glow of what had already turned out to be a truly great Sunday. He grabbed his keys and wallet from a pair of pants crumpled up beside the mattress, scrupulously transferred them to the pockets of the pants he was wearing, patted the thigh pocket to hear the keys jingle, he didn't want to get locked out, strode over to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. "I'd be careful of that," said Ned, who happened to be stepping out at the same time. "You were whistling just now, and you probably didn't even know it. You ought to watch that. I know what I'm talking about." Ned was dressed in a green jumpsuit with right rubber boots that came up to his knees and holding a shiny new gardening trowel up in his right hand. "Hey, did you see that guy yet, the specialist? About the muttering?" said Ned. "Probably not, huh? You probably figured a specialist like that wouldn't be available in the middle of the night on a Saturday. I certainly wouldn't try to see a doctor in the middle of the night on a Saturday, even if I were desperate, which I probably would be, if I were like you, muttering to myself all the time without even knowing it. But it's not exactly the kind of thing you can take to the emergency room, is it? Get yourself locked up that way. People just don't understand. They don't understand problems like that. But you could have gone to this specialist. He's a regular Dr. Kildare. He's on a mission." This guy just said, "Sure, Ned, bye, take it easy," pulled the door closed until he heard the lock click, and brushed past Ned heading for the steps. In truth, this guy wasn't even listening to Ned. He was thinking about his evil scheme to get even with Ned. He was thinking, here's Ned, my future victim, twittering at me in the hallway, thinking he's being friendly, thinking he's trying to help me out. But I'm not listening to a word he says. That's pretty rude, this guy was thinking. But compared to what I'm going to do to Ned, rude hardly counts. Okay, now we get into the really weird ones. This is the last one, okay, and it's from a book called Little Rooms. Okay. It doesn't have an epigraph, but it says for Lisa. Even though it's a weird book to be done. Okay, so this is a little bit strange. I need to explain this just a little bit. There's a bunch of kind of prologue-like material on the first couple pages, but then the main narrative starts here, okay? But before that, there's a single sentence that's isolated from that. And the reason I did this is that I wanted this to be the passage into the novel, okay? And if I hadn't been so lazy, I would have created a visual aid right now, but I didn't. So you can imagine it, though. If you hear this sentence is like the page turning into the beginning of the novel. Okay, and the sentence is, Parson Smith opens his door from the inside. So now we're in the novel. "Hello, Jack," says Parson Smith. "Hi," says Jack. "You look great." "I'm losing my hair," says Parson Smith. "It's the hooch," says Jack. "Maybe," says Parson Smith, "but I believe it is occurring as a result of the conjugal relations I enjoy with my better half, Mary Smith." "Could be," says Jack. "How's the little guy?" says Parson Smith. "He's completely out of hand," says Jack. "He's a monster." "Talking now, is he?" says Parson Smith. "Yes," says Jack. "He talks in complete sentences, and he refers to himself in the third person." "Sit down on the couch beside Mary Smith," says Parson Smith, "and we'll all have some hooch." Parson Smith motions to the couch with his long arm, which is meaty. "I could really use it," says Jack. "That little guy is a real handful, he sure is. Then again, on some days he's not so bad. The days when he mostly sleeps, for example. On those days, when I've come back from a long evening of hooch drinking and conversation with you and your better half, Mary Smith, and I find him sleeping in the big orange chair, it's a real joy. It's a real joy for me to see him there, sleeping." "But he's talking now," says Parson Smith. "Yes," says Jack. "These days when he has started talking in complete sentences and referring to himself in the third person are a completely different story. These days his presence is much less like a joy and much more like a discomfiting and burdensome affliction that gives me the creeps." "I'll get the hooch," says Parson Smith. Mary Smith is sitting on the couch watching the little people on in the TV. She's wearing a yellow house dress. The couch is red and lumpy. Jack shifts his weight around the lumps. "Hello, Mary Smith," says Jack. "Hi, Jack," says Mary Smith. "I came from upstairs," says Jack. "That was good of you," says Mary Smith. "So good of you, Jack." "You look great, Mary Smith," says Jack. "Oh, please, Jack," says Mary Smith. "Look at the TV. They're talking now, I'm sure, but I can't make out what it is they're saying." "You look really great," says Jack. "Here's the hooch," says Parson Smith, returning. Here's to you, says Jack. Here's to you, says Mary Smith. Down she goes, said Parson Smith. That's fine hooch, says Jack. Sure is, says Parson Smith. Top shelf, says Jack. Always, says Parson Smith. I'll bet, says Mary Smith. I mean that skeptically, says Mary Smith. The last time I went to the hooch depot, there wasn't anything on the top shelf. The guy said, look at this. And he wiped the top shelf with this finger, and the finger got all black. That indicated to me that the top shelf had been empty for some time. And then the guy said, I haven't seen the truck assigned to deliver the hooch that goes on the top shelf in a long while. That truck, if I remember correctly, was a white truck with a simple geometrical design on the side. The design was not white, the design was blue. It was blue. That indicated to me, says Mary Smith, that there had been a crisis abroad, and that crisis had interrupted either the production or distribution of the hooch, designated to be displayed on the top shelf. I felt sad when I made that inference. I feel sad now remembering it. I feel as badly as I did the day I muddied my mother's laundry. I'll be right back, says Parson Smith. On that day, says Mary Smith to Jack, I was a little girl. I played with the wind that then often visited our backyard. The backyard belonged to my mother, my father, and I, or so I thought. Actually, the backyard belonged to a fourth party. I met this fourth party later in life. I was no longer a girl when I met him. I was a woman, and the appliances of women were available to me, though I hardly knew then what use might have been made of them. I won't say I didn't try anyway, times being what they were, but this is all stuff and nonsense, isn't it, Jack? Well, says Jack, the world was so clean when I was young, says Mary Smith. And then, when I was not so young, it started getting dirty. Dirt got under my nails and in my hair and in my ears. I was thinking about laundry, my mother's laundry, snapping in the wind in our backyard. I used to spend the long afternoons playing in the wind with the laundry snapping. This obsession, I can't get past it. One day, there I was on the shiny green grass with the white laundry snapping. My mother's face was in the window, smiling at me with all of her long mouth. I played and played and played, and then she went away, and then something happened. The thing that happened was so simple and formless. The wind shifted and disappeared. The sky folded into dusk, and the laundry was dirty. That's how simple it was. That's all it really took. Bring me something, Parson Smith. Sure thing, says Parson Smith from the kitchen. And from then on, things began to be swallowed into normalcy, says Mary Smith to Jack. I met the fourth party who truly had possession of the backyard that I had formerly thought belonged to my mother, my father, and I. And there was blood. But later, that was swallowed into normalcy. And I met Parson Smith, and Parson Smith with his hooch and his absent hair is becoming swallowed into normalcy. And you, Jack, one day will you too become swallowed into normalcy? Says Mary Smith, becoming teary. What's the
Thanks so much, James. And now my great pleasure to introduce Barbara Wuest, a graduate of UC-Irvine's MFA in Creative Writing. She taught English and Creative Writing at Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee. Her poems have appeared in a variety of literary journals, such as the Cape Rock, Wind Literary Journal, Laurel Review, the Paris Review, Cincinnati Poetry Review, Dogwood, CrossCurrents, Oberon, Beloit Poetry Journal, Wisconsin Academy Review, and others. Aldrich Press has published her three most recent collections of poetry, Rhythms All Aquiver, Monarchs Fly Great Distance, and Shadowy Third. Among others, a chapbook was published by Finishing Line Press, and Through Slatted Blinds was published in 2013. She is also the author of a memoir, Drive Gently. In the poem Thou, which is the last in Rhythms All Aquiver, Barbara Wuest plays with the relationship between subject and object, self and other, artist and practice. The poem ends, quote, "You art," which reads as both an affirmation of being, one's own as well as that of others, and as a direct address to the process of creation. And this multiplicity of meaning underscores an openness that is central to her writing. Again, from thou, quote, "Yet you are ever open to doubt, self and otherwise you are open." As a poet, Wuest crucially leaves herself open to quote, "the wonders that stop us short," with a close attention and receptivity to the moment, the places she's inhabiting, and the people who are with her, both in the present and in memory. And in her writing, we often see, quote, no pause between what was and what is. As time is compressed, as Wuest looks to memory for its echoes in the present, never with the wistfulness of nostalgia, but still with great tenderness and care. She doesn't turn away from loss, from the reality of our perishable bodies, yet doesn't let that distract from a sense of joy and gratitude. And she remains open, even and especially to doubt, as she reaches after, quote, the source that explains the illogical nature of truth. As Christopher Nelson notes, Barbara Wuest, quote, stresses how crucial it is to document moments that we can recognize as true, even when we do not fully understand. The world is complex, and rather than simplify it, she illuminates the richness of it. Please welcome Barbara Wuest.
I want to thank Woodland Pattern, first of all. They've supported me over the years. They've never turned me down, and I really appreciate this place, and Mike and the staff. And I want to thank also Jim for the patience, waiting and waiting and waiting for this to happen. And all my friends for being here, so thank you. Since it's almost late August, I'm going to read a poem about that. Stella and her late August garden. Get that tomato there, and that one, she says as she points with her cane and holds my arm. We have walked the short space from the back porch to her late August garden. Tomatoes too ripe, yellow-green peppers in threes bursting through the dry. Doing as I'm told, I pick the red ones, snap off the best peppers, and set them one by one on the brown grass. If this moment is as large as it seems right now, I must surrender it. Give up myself to a will neither mine nor hers. Listen when she says, when Petey was small, we had a summer this dry. Get those peppers. No pause between what was and what is, she points again. We turn and walk back. Then, trading my arm for the porch rail, she says, I can make it from here. And now I return, as if I am not alone, to gather her sweet gifts. Stella was a real person. She was a neighbor of ours when I was a kid. And speaking of gifts, this poem is called The Brain and the Heart and the Dove. And the dove in the Christian tradition is a symbol of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit has the power to impart 7 gifts to us. And 2 of them I'm going to work with here, wisdom and understanding. The brain and the heart and the dove. On the granite altar in the Holy Spirit Chapel of the National Cathedral, there are 7 words, the first being wisdom, written in calligraphy beneath a dove fixed in flight, wings spread, easing down like a small plane about to land. Wisdom, they say, has something to do with good judgment, and I am told that the elderly have it, not the young. I've been waiting for a sign that it may have brushed by me on its way to a grassy knoll for a short rest before scattering its magic hither and yon as I trust our good judging dove to arrive and target our needs. 2. Good judgment takes a brain. Drawings in science books show it has many folds, muscle tucked in tight, looking like a large head of cauliflower we could roast, eat, and sate our hunger. The trick is to take that organ, get on the bus, and relieve our boredom by bringing to mind the drawings of the mighty brain, where wisdom may be stored and doled out by the holy dove. 3. I board the city bus and greet the smiling driver, sit down, put my backpack on the seat beside me, imagine her kids waking on Saturday morning, glad she doesn't have to work, glad their mother can sleep in. They are not selfish, but wise beyond their years, we'd say. 4. It's an organ of brilliance and an organ of deceit, an organ of compassion, an organ of hate, and an organ of requited love we hope the dove leaves behind, where she, in the next picture, understanding, is caught in a nose-diving pose, moving straight down like a missile full of light, opening the heart, the carefree heart of a wise little child, lining up her dolls, asking in earnest when our questions don't fly, why, why, yes, but why? The next poem is called Our Italy, and I know no one wants to think about the pandemic, but this was a clip I saw on television about a choir that helped us all get through, all the people in Italy, to get through this awful time. It was a hard time for Italy at the beginning. And I mentioned that there's a line in here from an opera, Verdi opera called Nabucco, and it's based on a biblical story of when the Jews were exiled from their homeland by Nebuchadnezzar. I call it Our Italy. I watch its suffering from a distance, Italy's, and sometimes forget its people are not in my living room but miles away. At those moments, tears come out of nowhere, and I find myself on one of those balconies, singing my heart out as if no killer virus lived there anymore. And then we get an aerial view, a plane flying over Rome, the Colosseum in its wholeness and splendor we can't see from the ground, as one of a group following a guide, not knowing how to respond to the grandeur. So I walked on, listened to its long history. But I'm in my house, remembering being a tourist in the city called Eternal, where I threw a few coins in the Trevi Fountain, where I waited in a long line to witness the Sistine Chapel, to see those famous hands almost touching, God giving light, God giving life. Today on the screen between me and the images, I see nothing but death, the numbers in one day staggering. The camera scans the hospital's halls, the sick waiting their turn, the healers doing what they can with just a few tools. And they keep telling us the numbers increasing by the minute, the cases, they say, thousands of cases we all know are people with mothers and lovers and children, and the dire need for touch that Michelangelo knew well. From St. Peter's Square, the camera moves to a screen full of squares, each with a living person singing from their homes, the International Opera Choir. Apart yet together in the song they sing from an opera by Verdi, A Native Son. In Italian, they lift their voices to say, "Oh, my country, so beautiful and lost." The camera then turns to one person on a balcony, holding a plaque shaped like the boot, the Italy, ours, she holds in her arms like a baby in dire need. I watch the news a lot, I guess. This poem is called The News. And it's about a mother, how a mother honors her dead son. And there's a word in here that you might not know, quesillo, which is a Venezuelan dessert, like flan, I guess. All right, it's called The News. Venezuela's economy is in free fall. Children are hungry and can't learn. A young man joined a gang and was killed by that gang, so his mother makes coffee for him each day and sets it on a small table by his photograph. If I were a painter, I would paint him back into the scene, his deep brown arms resting on the table, his t-shirt so white that it lights that holy corner where he waits for the coffee, waits as it brews. His jeans would be black, his Nikes white, the cross around his neck gold, a curl from his wavy back black hair fallen over his smooth forehead. His cup would be glazed blue. If I were a maker of film, I would have him push it back in place, only to have it fall forward again, mother smiling, shaking her head. I'd show her standing by the stove waiting, arms crossed, the epitome of patience in her deeply lined face. She'd ask what he plans for the day. He shrugs. The dog walks in. He leans down to pet its back. If I were a painter, I'd paint houses with such people in them, eating. They would be telling stories, the mother about the distant past, the son about the near future. They would not look afraid. I'd paint them not to be afraid. I'd add a little sister to this scene. She'd have long dark hair. She would wear it in braids, red bows tied to the ends of each one. Her eyes would glisten dark brown. If I were a maker of film, she'd sit by her brother and wait for the creamy casillo to be served. There would be no hunger in this house, and that, my friends, would be the very best news you could hear. You'd shout it from the rooftops all around the globe. The children are fed. If only art could be life. If only our words could nourish the body as well as the soul. But children are hungry and can't learn. Gangs against gangs scavenge for food. A mother makes coffee for her dead son and sets it on a table by his photograph. And yet we keep making art all around here. This is called album cover art. And the album that I'm going to be talking about is Glenn Gould Plays Bach, the English Suites. So here goes. Album cover art. Glenn Gould plays the Bach, the English Suites. His white, clean-shaven face and right hand take up half the front cover and emerge out of the blackness of his suit that blends with the dark background. We can see up close his lips, nose, one deep eye, brow, and the wrinkled forehead of a seeker in love. But it's the direction of his stare to his right and looking out that speaks as he imitates the pose from a drawing of Bach, ear cocked as if listening for something he can't yet hear, mouth closed and ready to hum and receive his body, the dead man's lives and loves. And he is looking at me with that one deep eye that tells me to listen and to listen again for his heart and Bach's and what they each pass on, gifts I wish I could fully receive and know whatever they know that makes that album cover eye exude energy so pure I am taken by surprise, his film noir gaze as seductive as the sounds the vinyl sets free. And that humming is, he's noted for humming when he plays the piano. He's a classical pianist from Canada. Having grown up Catholic, I went to Mass a lot because we were required to, mostly. And the form and the movement and the whole rhythm of the ritual is ingrained in me somehow. And I've just come to love it. So I wrote my own poem called Mass. And I'm going to read 3 poems from it. When a priest says Mass, she often will celebrate, they say she celebrates the Mass, and this, I hope, is a celebration of people I care about. So anyway, I wrote my own Mass, and I'm going to read 3 poems from that longer piece. Gloria. Innocence gathered during the night lifts its palms in the tarnished glow the going casts. It's the new sameness I can count on. My God, the window frames a flood of leaves so green they seem to cry, here we are, nothing to come after, no promise. And the glory's in the memory I take to Manhattan, where I find myself staring at another morning and window. Black fire escapes zigzag down the brick sides of buildings laden with soot. A jackhammer shakes its way to the earth, and the window spreads before me, something so closed it opens on you with all the fervor of a choir's Alleluia. I might mention, while I was writing this poem, I was reading a lot of the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, and the core of his philosophy has something to do with the face-to-face relationship. The next poem is called Credo, or Creed. I believe in sons and daughters going through the city's turnstiles, through the ivy archways of small, quiet towns, some staying like stray pollen, others leaving with their luggage full of failure and maps to places it might not be. I believe the striations in the sky after rain call the least of us to flights we don't have wings enough to make. And yet we all end up in our own closets of guilty self-respect, whether forced to land on cement or open field. When the subway roars under my feet, I know my own blood bullets through me with that same rage to get somewhere. And I believe the heat from this speed means at least you're alive for now, and at least I'm disturbed beyond my perfect cycle, my song at least. Final prayer. May any commingling produced by the loops and curves of this mass add to the people's search. Let it live in its own beaker. Let it be juice enough to sit alongside the beaker from which it came. Let it remain there until someone comes along again with a need to weed around the tombstone. My sister died on June the 7th. I had the privilege of hearing from her a description of the way that she prays, her own personal ritual, and this is about that. My sister's faith. She will sleep in her recliner as she always does. It's dark. The 10 o'clock news offered nothing. It's time to surrender this day. As a child, she learned prayers by rote, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be. So she pulls a blanket over her head like a child and calls those prayers, and they come on command even after all these years, and they give her what she needs to ease her fears. I told her of a video I saw showing a very tall monk looking at an aspen tree that was shimmering in the wind. The divine in the tree, he said, was waving to the divine in him, and he smiled big like a happy child. My sister then told me of another night she was in the hospital. She started singing Amazing Grace, and she swears God appeared to her. He was there, she said, right in front of my face, and I know you think I'm crazy, but it's true. And it was such a beautiful time in the dark room with tubes running every which way, lots of commotion in the hall, and that extraordinary thing happening to her. I know you don't believe me, she said. I did believe her. I do believe her. I will always believe the face of her divine shows itself in dark hospital rooms and sleeping bags on the streets and any dark corner where people are alone with only blurred memories of all their better days. This next poem is about swans. I grew up in Barberton, Ohio, and there's this lake in the middle of the town, and a common scene was to see two swans on that lake. I never understood where they went in the wintertime. That's partly what this is about. Also, there's a name here, I mentioned Pliny, and he was a Roman author and naturalist who died in 70 AD. So this is called Time to Sing. On the round lake in my hometown, the geese come and go, the swans stay, until the caretakers move them to a farm to wait out the freeze. Captive, they live more than 30 years. In the wild, only 12. That they sing more beautifully and mournfully just before dying, we've known since Pliny, is false, but the people can never let go. It was his swan song, they say, even when it's not a song, even when it's the last car part he made, the touchdown, the last brick. I know a poet who dreamt of swans, woke to the words that fit, describing their spongy skin as the source of his mother's peace. His mother, held captive, lived a long time, wanted to be free, to live in the wild like the swans of her dreams and cut it all short. My friend the poet is suddenly dead, no pretty and final song, no time for anything false. He leaves me nestled in the down of the swan and proved to the world there's nothing more true than its spongy skin, nothing more sad than no time to sing. I think a lot about things. I like things, and whether it's trivial things or noble things or whatever. I think about the fact that they're going to outlive me. They'll see the future and I won't. They'll know the plot, I guess. Anyway, so this is two different things that I wrote about. It's called In Perpetuity. 1, costume jewelry. What you need to know, they're dead. My mother Vivian, my cousin Vera, dead a long time, and I'm left with their bling. It's Tuesday, and I have no plans, no person I need to see. Still, I bother to put on my mother's earrings, fake gold, sweetly designed cut-out flowers to decorate my ears. On the third finger of my right hand, I pushed my cousin's ring that came from the Black Hills. Now it's mine. My mother's earrings, also mine. Their jewelry has been bequeathed to me, these treasures no one else wants. I am the custodian of cheap jewelry, responsible for making sure their meanings, that is to say, their stories, keep living past Vivian, past Vera, past even those who believe the belongings of the dead we love are relics, reminding us to say again and again, once upon a time. 2. The Aaron Monument. The day Hank Aaron died, a fan drove to the stadium where a bronze statue stands in honor of the great athlete who broke records, endured racism, stayed the course no matter how many death threats were thrust on the renowned player, this prince of a man. The TV camera is fixed on the fan's adoring and sad face, looking up at the sculptor's depiction of Hank, who had 755 career home runs, one statistic among many that the fan surely knows, camera moving in close enough to see a tear running down his cheek. I think of the sculptor himself, alone in his studio, studying a picture of one very much alive, shaping the hands, the arms, the bat, then choosing to show his mortal hero perpetually ready for the next pitch. This is called A Voice, and I don't think it's my voice. I think it came in somewhere because there's some very strange views of life that this voice expresses. And I have an epigraph here, How Can Growing Old Become Rebirth by Yves Bonnefoy, a French poet. People think I'm crazy when I say I want to be the forgotten one in the shadowy corner of the hospice room, its institutional beds and chairs barely visible to me, even when I pull the sheet from my face and reach for my glasses, which are also shadowed, though I can still feel for them, find them, and use my hands to put them on. No one notices, and what a pleasure it is not to be noticed, not to be required to talk about a feeling I wouldn't know how to describe anyway, so why bother? A well-turned phrase or just the perfect adjective that nails it only unleashes the urge to say more. There's always a better or truer word. Truer, though, is the wrong word. Something is either true or it's not true. Still, I've often heard people say truer words have never been spoken. All it means is that you agree, or more accurately, you strongly agree with someone else, when someone says what someone says. So you wonder why a person can't just say, I agree. No, we have to do more. We have to emphasize the extent to which we concur with the one who is saying what we hear them utter. So I say I want to be the forgotten one in the shadowy corner of that hospice room, one I have to imagine since I'm still moving on my own. Even when I wasn't dying, I was aware that we ask too much of life and too much of our language too. For years I've said under my breath, there'll come a day when I won't be able to do this or that normal thing, like walk to the store for a loaf of bread. It was my mantra, there'll come a day. In a country where achieving's supreme, we come out of the womb, kicking and screaming and raring to get on board, even when our excess of words fails, and I'm thrown from the line back into life that picks up steam and then wanes, gives and takes back, until we learn we can do very well without too much. So I'll end with a poem called Traveling. This is in my book, The Rhythms All Aquiver. And a malacone I mention here is the stone, the seawall in Havana. Traveling. I saw the blue water splashing as promised over the malacone. It didn't disappoint. The blue was as true for real as it was on the glossy page. Like Cuba, I'm aging, doing what I can with what's left. With much trepidation, I flew to her, thinking of the priest who'd advised me not to do what I'm inclined to do. I was inclined to stay home, not to rub elbows with islanders so utterly other I was shy in their presence. Everyone dances in Havana. Some live hand to mouth, and still they dance and open their arms, fold me in, and loosen my grip on my tucked-in life, my control in a shambles and strewn over the sand like lucky stars. Thank you.
Barbara, thank you. James, thanks again. Thanks once more to all of you for joining us and also online. So I invite you to check out the bookstore, and of course, don't forget to take some directions to the reception, and have a wonderful night. Thanks, everybody.